The night I agreed to go to that charity gala, I told myself the worst thing that could happen was humiliation. I was wrong. The lights inside the ballroom were blinding, too bright, too unforgiving, like they were designed to expose every crack you'd learned to hide. Crystal chandeliers hung above us like silent judges, reflecting a version of me that looked polished on the outside, and completely fractured inside. I stood there in a borrowed confidence, my spine straight, my smile practiced, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid someone might hear it over the orchestra. Loneliness, I learned, doesn't always look like being alone. Sometimes it wears an elegant dress and walks into a room full of couples. My name is Emily Whitaker and I live in Boston, Massachusetts, a city obsessed with tradition, achievement, and quiet perfection. From the outside, my life looked respectable. I worked at a biomedical firm, mid-level position, decent salary. The kind of job parents brag about to relatives. The kind of job that slowly drains you when no one is watching. 3 years ago, my husband Daniel died suddenly. No warnings. No goodbyes. One phone call and my world collapsed. Time taught me how to function. It never taught me how to stop feeling like I was drowning in rooms like this. The invitation to the Children's Hope Foundation Gala arrived weeks earlier, my name printed neatly at the top. At the bottom, a subtle line that felt louder than it should have. Guests are encouraged to attend with a companion. That sentence followed me for days. Because as a woman, walking into spaces like this alone doesn't just invite sympathy, it invites questions. Judgments. Pity dressed up as concern. Why is she alone? What went wrong? Did she fail at marriage? I could already hear it. At home, my mother had said softly, "Beta, how long will you live like this? At least for events you should have someone with you." People talk. They always do. So I made a decision I never thought I would. I hired an escort. Not for romance. Not for intimacy. For survival. I chose an agency known for professionalism, strict boundaries, discretion, no drama. I didn't want scandal. I wanted invisibility. His profile said his name was Ethan Clark. 24 years old. That number sat uncomfortably in my chest, but the agency assured me everything was legal, respectful, and controlled. Still, I knew how the world would see us standing together. A lonely widow clinging to youth. A man trading his age for security. The labels came pre-written. When Ethan arrived at my apartment to prepare for the evening, the contrast hit me instantly. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, sharp but understated. There was something careful about the way he stood, like someone who learned early how to take up as little space as possible. His confidence wasn't loud. It was constructed. Practiced. Life had clearly forced him to grow up faster than he should have. There was no flirting. No performance. Just polite warmth. And somehow, that made it harder. The gala itself unfolded inside a luxury hotel overlooking the Charles River. The air buzzed with donors, executives, politicians, all congratulating one another for generosity that often doubled as ego. As we entered, my shoulders tensed automatically. I felt exposed. But Ethan walked beside me with calm steadiness, matching my pace, never rushing, never pulling ahead, like he understood that tonight wasn't about him shining. It was about me surviving. People watched us. Not openly. Not rudely. But enough. Eyes lingered. Calculations happened. I felt their assumptions settle on my skin like dust. As conversations blurred and the orchestra softened, Ethan leaned slightly closer. Close enough that only I could hear him. His voice was quiet. Controlled. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I nodded. He hesitated. I felt the tension in his breath before he spoke again. "Is my age going to be a problem for you? Or for how you see me?" That question didn't sting. Flattered. Because it wasn't about legality. Or appearances. It was about worth. He wasn't asking permission to exist in that room. He was asking whether he would be dismissed as less than human. And in that moment I realized something terrifying. I had hired him to avoid judgment. And yet, I was standing face to face with my own. My thoughts spiraled. Memories of Daniel, of the values he lived by, of the way he believed everyone carried battles you couldn't see. I looked at Ethan again, really looked. Not a number. Not a role. A person. And I knew this night was about to change in ways I never expected. After Ethan asked me that question, the room didn't change. But I did. The music kept playing. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell like waves. Yet something inside me cracked open, raw and uncomfortable. I realized how casually people like him, and people like me, were reduced to assumptions before we ever spoke. I straightened my shoulders not for the room but for him. "No," I said quietly. "Your age isn't a problem." The relief in his eyes was immediate, and that hurt more than anything else. How many times had he asked that question before? How many times had he already learned to expect rejection? We moved deeper into the crowd, stopping as familiar faces approached. Board members, donors, old colleagues who still spoke to me in lowered voices as if grief had damaged my hearing. "This is Emily," one man said to Ethan, barely looking at him. "She's one of our most reliable contributors." Reliable. Like a machine. "And this is Ethan," I replied before he could be dismissed. "He's here with me tonight." I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I felt Ethan shift beside me, surprised maybe, as if he wasn't used to being claimed openly. Conversation followed conversation. Safe topics. Polite smiles. But I noticed things now. How people asked me questions and directed their eyes at him only when curiosity demanded it. How they spoke around him instead of to him. And I noticed how expertly he navigated it. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, his words were thoughtful, careful. Not the shallow charm people expected from someone in his position. At one point, a woman in a pearl necklace leaned toward me and whispered, "He's very young." I smiled tightly. "So was I once," I said. She laughed, uncomfortable. Ethan caught my eye afterward. There was a flicker of something there. Gratitude mixed with disbelief. As if he wasn't used to someone standing between him and the blade. As dinner was served, the room softened. Lights dimmed slightly. Conversation slowed. We sat across from each other, plates untouched for a moment. "You don't have to defend me," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "But I want to." That startled him. I could tell. He told me in fragments about taking college classes part-time. Business administration. Night courses. How he sent most of his earnings back home to Ohio. "Hi Mom," he said almost apologetically. "Ruth. She works double shifts at a nursing home." There was no self-pity in his voice. Just fact. Just responsibility. And suddenly the labels people had placed on him felt obscene. I thought of the pressure I'd lived under my whole life. Be polite, be presentable, be married, be quiet about pain. Even after Daniel's death, the expectations didn't disappear. They simply changed shape. Don't be lonely too loudly. Don't age without dignity. Don't make people uncomfortable. I had followed those rules for years. Tonight something in me was tired of obeying. As dessert was served, a man approached our table, Harold Bennett, senior board member. The kind of man whose wealth insulated him from ever questioning himself. He looked at Ethan, then back at me, smiling thinly. "Well," he said, "it's good to see you enjoying life again, Emily. Youth can be invigorating." The table went quiet. I felt heat rise in my chest, anger sharp enough to cut. Before I could respond, Ethan spoke. Calm. Measured. "I think what's invigorating," he said, "is seeing how much tonight's donations will change children's lives. That's why we're all here, isn't it?" Harold blinked. The moment stretched. Then someone laughed, not at Ethan but at Harold. The power shifted. Harold muttered something and walked away. I stared at Ethan, stunned. He didn't look proud. He looked tired. Like someone who had learned how to deflect disrespect without flinching. Something inside me rearranged itself. For the rest of the evening I stopped performing. I spoke honestly about Daniel. About loss. About loneliness. About why the foundation mattered to me. And people listened. Not with pity. With respect. By the time applause filled the room for the final fundraising total, higher than expected, I felt something unfamiliar in my chest. Not joy. Not relief. Connection. As we stepped outside afterward, the city lights shimmered across the river like scattered prayers. The cold air bit gently at my skin. For the first time in years I wasn't bracing myself against the world. I was standing in it. Beside another human being. And I knew whatever happened after tonight, I would never see people the same way again. When the gala finally ended, it didn't feel like a conclusion. It felt like the moment after a storm. When the noise is gone but the ground is still soaked. People drifted out in small clusters, laughter echoing through the marble halls, heels clicking, coats pulled tight. The grand doors closed behind them one by one, sealing away the performance we had all been part of. Ethan and I walked slowly toward the exit. No script left to follow. Outside, the night air was sharp and honest. The Charles River reflected the city lights, broken and beautiful, like something that had been through too much and still dared to shine. Neither of us spoke at first. I realized how rare that kind of silence was, the kind that doesn't demand filling. "I should get you home," I finally said. He nodded. The drive was quiet but not uncomfortable. Streetlights passed rhythmically, illuminating his face in brief flashes. In those moments I saw exhaustion beneath the composure. "You handled tonight better than most people twice your age," I said. He gave a small smile. "You learn fast when you don't have a choice." That answer stayed with me. As we drove, my thoughts wandered. To Daniel, to the life I thought I was supposed to have by now, to the invisible rules that had shaped every decision I'd made as a woman. Be agreeable. Be appropriate. Be grateful for whatever you're given. Even grief had rules. We stopped outside his building. Modest, quiet, nothing like the luxury we'd just left behind. I turned off the engine. For a moment neither of us moved. "Thank you," he said softly. "For tonight. For not treating me like a role." My throat tightened. "I should be thanking you," I replied. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten." He looked at me, curious but careful. "That dignity," I continued, choosing my words, "isn't something we earn by behaving perfectly. Something we deserve. Automatically." He absorbed that in silence. I handed him the envelope. Payment, neat and impersonal, everything this arrangement was supposed to be. He took it without counting. And yet we both knew the real exchange had already happened. As he opened the door he paused. "I hope," he said, "that people are kinder to you than you expect." I watched him walk inside, the door closing softly behind him. I sat there longer than I meant to, staring at the empty sidewalk. Something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But permanently. In the weeks that followed I changed things. Small at first. I volunteered more with the foundation, not just donating but showing up. Talking to the young women aging out of foster care. Listening to their stories without trying to fix them. I spoke openly at work about loss and loneliness. About how grief doesn't disappear just because time passes. Some people were uncomfortable. Others were relieved. At home, when my mother asked again about remarriage, I didn't argue. I simply said, "I'm not broken." And for the first time I believed it. I even returned to my faith community. Cautiously. Not for answers but for connection. I remembered that belief wasn't about perfection. It was about compassion in action. One afternoon weeks later I found a handwritten note waiting for me. Ethan's handwriting was neat, careful. He thanked me for seeing him. For standing beside him. For reminding him that his worth wasn't negotiable. I placed that note in my desk drawer. Not as a reminder of him, but as a reminder of myself. Of the night I stopped shrinking. Of the moment I chose presence over fear. I realized then that healing doesn't always come from looking backward or rushing forward. Sometimes it happens when you stand fully in a moment, and decide to see another human being clearly. The gala hadn't fixed my loneliness, but it had softened it. And sometimes, that's how real change begins. After that night I started noticing things I had ignored before. Not just in others, but in myself. I noticed how often women like me were expected to carry loss quietly, to age gracefully without asking for anything in return. How loneliness in men was treated as tragedy, but loneliness in women was treated as failure. I noticed how easily we learn to apologize for taking up space. At work, during meetings, I caught myself softening my opinions, wrapping them in politeness so they wouldn't sound too much. I stopped doing that. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. Just honestly. And something strange happened. People listened. The foundation asked me to speak at a small event. Nothing glamorous. Just a room of volunteers and donors. My hands shook as I stood at the podium. I didn't prepare a speech about success. I talked about grief. About how isolating it is to lose someone and still be expected to perform happiness. About how charity isn't just about money, it's about recognizing humanity where society prefers labels. When I finished there was silence. Then applause, not loud but real. Afterward a young woman approached me. Early 20s. Nervous smile. "Thank you," she said. I didn't think someone like you would understand someone like me. That sentence landed hard. Someone like you. Someone like me. I realized how deep those invisible lines ran. I thought of Ethan again, of the way he had asked about his age not as a fact but as a fear. How many people lived like that? Measuring themselves against standards they never set? Even my relationship with my mother changed. One evening she said softly, "I only worry because people judge." "I know," I replied. "But I'm tired of living my life as an answer to other people's opinions." She didn't argue. She just nodded. That was new. Months passed. Life didn't become perfect. Some nights were still heavy. Some mornings still quiet in ways that hurt. But the loneliness no longer defined me. I understood something I hadn't before. Dignity isn't given by marriage. Respect isn't earned by conformity. Worth isn't determined by how well you fit into someone else's comfort zone. I began mentoring young women formally through the foundation. Girls who had been told too early that their choices were limited. Girls who learned survival before safety. I never told them what to do. I listened. And every time one of them spoke about being judged, dismissed, or underestimated, I remembered that ballroom. The chandeliers, the whispers, the question whispered beside me. Is my age going to be a problem? That question had cracked open more than one night. It had cracked open a lifetime of assumptions. Sometimes late at night I wondered what Ethan was doing. Whether he'd finished his degree. Whether his mother was resting more. Our paths didn't cross again. They didn't need to. Some people aren't meant to stay. They're meant to shift you. I kept his note in my drawer untouched. Not because I was holding on, but because I didn't want to forget the lesson. That kindness doesn't have to be loud. That respect can be revolutionary. That seeing someone fully can change both of you. And if you're listening to this story right now, if any part of it feels familiar, I want you to pause for a moment. Think about the last time you judged someone silently. Or the last time you assumed you knew their story. We all do it. The difference is what we choose next. Some stories end with grand gestures. This one didn't. It ended the way most real transformations do, softly without an audience. A year after the gala, I stood by the Charles River again. Same city. Same lights scattered across the water. But I wasn't the same woman who had once walked into that ballroom wearing borrowed confidence. I had learned something important since then. Healing isn't about replacing what you lost. It's about expanding around the absence until it no longer defines you. People still asked questions. About my age. About my future. About whether I would ever move on. I stopped answering the ones that came from curiosity instead of care. I learned that as a woman, especially one who has lost and survived, my life doesn't need to make sense to anyone but me. The foundation continued to grow. Not just in numbers, but in purpose. I watched young women stand taller after being listened to. I watched donors soften when they heard real stories instead of polished presentations. And every time I saw someone dismissed because they didn't fit a comfortable narrative, I remembered that quiet question Ethan had asked me. Not am I allowed to be here? But do you see me as worthy? That question deserves a yes, always. One afternoon while cleaning out my desk I found his note again. The paper had yellowed slightly. The ink still steady. Thank you for seeing me. I held it for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not because I missed the night, but because I honored who I had become because of it. I donated that evening dress a few weeks later. Navy blue. Elegant. Heavy with memory. I didn't need it anymore. The lesson stayed. If this story has touched something in you, if it's reminded you how easy it is to judge and how powerful it is to choose compassion instead, then I ask you to do something simple. Pause. The next time you meet someone, resist the shortcut. See the human before the label. And if you believe that kindness can change lives in quiet, powerful ways, leave a comment below with the word grace. Not for the algorithm. For yourself. Because redemption doesn't always arrive in dramatic moments. Sometimes it comes dressed in calm confidence under bright chandeliers. Sometimes it arrives as a single question whispered in a crowded room. And sometimes it arrives when you decide to stop shrinking and start seeing. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. Your presence matters more than you know.